I work maintenance for a small office building on the outskirts of town. It's a 5-story building that houses different companies, mostly accounting firms and tech startups. I work the night shift, part-time, from 8 p.m. to midnight, Monday through Friday. The pay is decent, and honestly, I prefer working nights. No one bothers me, no one gets in my way, and I can just focus on getting the job done. This particular Wednesday night, I arrived at work like I always did, pulling into the nearly empty parking lot around 8 p.m. I grabbed my keys and headed to the back entrance, unlocking the heavy metal door and stepping into the dark hallway. I flipped on the lights, checked my work order for the night, and everything felt normal. Just another routine shift. I had no idea how wrong I was. I clocked in at 8:15 and started on the first floor. My usual routine was pretty straightforward. Check the electrical systems, replace any burnt-out bulbs, make sure the bathrooms were stocked and clean, test the emergency lights. The building was always incredibly quiet at night. Just the sound of my footsteps echoing down the empty hallways and the occasional hum of the HVAC system. I finished up the first floor in about 45 minutes and headed up the stairwell to the second floor. This floor had the accounting and human resources offices. I walked through, checking the air conditioning units, wiping down some surfaces, making sure everything was in order. Around 9 p.m. I heard something, a dull thump from somewhere above me. I stopped what I was doing and listened carefully. Nothing, just silence. I figured it was probably the plumbing or maybe the air conditioning kicking on. Old buildings make weird noises all the time. I shook it off and kept working, but I was paying more attention now. Something about that sound made me uneasy, even though I tried to ignore it. I moved up to the third floor around 9:30. This floor housed the design team and IT department. I hit the lights in the hallway and started my rounds, going room by room. When I got to the IT room, I noticed something strange. One of the computer monitors was on. That was weird because company policy required everyone to shut down their computers before leaving. I walked over to check it out. The screen was showing the desktop, but no one was logged in. Just sitting there at the home screen, I reached over and powered it down, feeling a slight chill run through me. Maybe someone just forgot. It happens. I continued my check and walked toward the design room at the end of the hall. As I approached, I noticed the door was open just a crack. I distinctly remembered that door being closed tight this morning when I did my quick walkthrough before my shift. I pushed it open slowly and flicked on the lights. The room looked normal. Desks arranged neatly, computers off, drawing tablets put away. But there was this feeling I couldn't shake, like someone had just been in here moments before I arrived. I did a more thorough check, looking around carefully, but found nothing out of place. I closed the door firmly and headed back to finish the floor. It was already 10 p.m. I decided to go up to the fourth floor earlier than planned. Something was bothering me and I wanted to get through my rounds faster. The fourth floor was management offices and conference rooms. As I climbed the stairs, I heard it again. Footsteps, not mine, coming from above. I froze completely, holding my breath and listening as hard as I could. Total silence. My heart was pounding now. I must be imagining things. I forced myself to keep climbing. When I reached the fourth floor, I noticed the hallway seemed darker than usual. One of the fluorescent lights was flickering badly, casting strange shadows on the walls. I hit the main light switch and started checking each room systematically. I came to the large conference room. The door was closed. I opened it and turned on the lights. The table and chairs were arranged perfectly, everything looked fine. But then I saw it. A coffee cup sitting on the conference table. I walked over and touched it. Still warm, my stomach dropped. There was absolutely no one here when I started my shift. I checked. I always check. I pulled out my phone, ready to call security, but hesitated. Maybe someone had left it from this afternoon and the building just stayed warm. That didn't make sense, though. This cup was definitely warm, like someone had been drinking from it within the last hour. I needed to check the fifth floor before I made any calls. I climbed up to the fifth floor at 10:30. This was the top floor, home to the executive offices and the document storage room. I really didn't want to be up here now, but I had to finish my job. The hallway on the fifth floor felt oppressively quiet. Every small sound I made seemed amplified. I checked the main executive office first, locked tight as it should be. I walked down to the far end of the hallway where the storage room was located. My breath caught in my throat. The door was open about 6 inches. I knew for a fact this door was always kept locked. Always, a dim light was coming from inside. I stood outside the door trying to see through the gap. I could hear something, papers rustling. Someone was in there. I pushed the door open a little more and called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Is anyone there?" The rustling stopped immediately. Complete silence for about 5 seconds. Then I heard it. Running. Someone was running inside that storage room. I jerked back as I heard crashes, things being knocked over, heavy breathing. There was an emergency exit at the back of the storage room that led down to the service stairwell. I heard the metal door bang open and then slam shut. Whoever was in there had just escaped. I stood there frozen for a moment, my mind racing. Then I grabbed my phone and dialed 911 with shaking hands. The operator answered and I explained what had happened as clearly as I could. She told me to get outside the building immediately and wait for the police. I didn't need to be told twice. I ran toward the main stairwell and started taking the stairs 2 at a time. When I hit the third-floor landing, I heard a door open below me. The second-floor door. Someone was coming up the stairs. Panic hit me hard and I ran faster, practically flying down the remaining flights. I burst through the first-floor exit door and sprinted across the parking lot to my car. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the lock. I jumped inside and locked all the doors. I sat there breathing hard, staring at the back entrance of the building. Then I looked up at the windows. The lights on the third floor went dark. Then the second floor went dark. Someone was moving through the building, turning off lights as they went down. Someone was coming. About 2 minutes later, the back door opened and a figure stepped out. A man, tall, wearing a dark hoodie pulled up over his head. He walked quickly across the parking lot, not running but moving with purpose, and disappeared into the darkness beyond the street lights. 5 minutes later, I heard sirens. 2 police cars pulled into the lot with their lights flashing. 2 officers got out and I climbed out of my car to meet them. I told them everything that had happened, described the man I had just seen leaving the building. They called for backup and went inside to search. I waited outside for about 15 minutes, packing nervously. When they came back out, they told me the building was clear now, but they had found evidence. The storage room on the 5th floor had been ransacked. File cabinets were open, documents were pulled out and scattered everywhere, and some files were missing entirely. The emergency exit door at the back was still standing open. They also checked the IT room on the 3rd floor and found signs that the computer systems had been accessed without authorization. One of the officers said it looked like corporate espionage, someone trying to steal confidential company information. They took down all my information and asked me detailed questions about everything I had seen and heard. They told me I had probably interrupted a serious crime and advised me to go home. They would handle the investigation from here and contact the building management first thing in the morning. I drove home with my hands still trembling on the steering wheel. My mind kept replaying the entire night. That person had probably been hiding in the building since the afternoon, waiting for everyone to leave. They knew the night shift was just one person working alone. That coffee cup that was still warm, they had been drinking it when they heard me coming and had to hide. The computer that was turned on, they were copying data from it. The storage room on the 5th floor, stealing important documents. If I hadn't gone up early, if I hadn't checked that storage room, they might have gotten away with everything before I even knew anyone was there. I felt lucky that I never came face to face with them directly, but I was also terrified thinking about it. They knew I was there. They had been avoiding me deliberately, moving through the building just ahead of me. What would have happened if I had cornered them? Would they have tried to hurt me? The next day, the building management called me. They thanked me for what I had done. My actions had helped them discover a serious breach. Someone had stolen sensitive financial documents and client information. They were increasing security, installing new cameras, adding a second person to the night shift. I still worked the night shift. I need the job, and honestly, with the new security measures, it's probably safer than it was before. But I'll never forget that Wednesday night. And even with cameras and another person working with me now, I never truly feel alone in that building anymore. My name is Jake, and I'm 23 years old. I work as a night security guard at a 6-story parking garage in downtown. I know it's not the most glamorous job, but it pays the bills and lets me take online classes during the day. The shift runs from 10 at night until 6 in the morning, and honestly, most nights are pretty quiet. Not many cars come in or out after midnight, so I usually just sit in my booth and watch the cameras. This particular night was a Wednesday, and I started my shift like any other. I checked all the cameras, made sure the gates were working properly, and filled out my beginning of shift report. I had no reason to think anything unusual was going to happen. Around 11:30, I was sitting in my booth on the first floor going through some paperwork. I glanced up at the camera monitors like I do every few minutes and noticed something odd on the fourth floor feed. There was a dark sedan parked in the corner near the stairwell. The weird part was I didn't remember seeing that car come in. I mean, I could have missed it if I was looking down at my paperwork, but usually I hear the gate open and the sensor beeps. I pulled up the entry log on my computer to check when the car had entered. Nothing. There was no record of any vehicle coming in for the past 2 hours. I stared at the screen for a minute trying to figure it out. Maybe the system glitched, or maybe the car had been there since before my shift started, and I just didn't notice it on my initial rounds. The garage was old and the lighting was pretty dim, especially on the upper floors. A few bulbs were always burnt out and maintenance was slow to replace them. I decided I would go check it out in a little bit. For now, I went back to my paperwork. I work alone most nights and I'm used to the silence, but something about tonight felt a little different. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. About 45 minutes later, around 12:15, I decided to stop putting it off and go check the floors. I left the booth and took the elevator up. Second floor looked normal. A few cars parked in their usual spots, nothing out of place. Third floor, same thing. When I got to the fourth floor, the doors opened, and sure enough, that dark sedan was still sitting there in the same spot. The lights were off and I couldn't see anyone inside. I walked over slowly, my footsteps echoing in the empty concrete space. The sound of wind whistled through the open sides of the garage. I got close enough to look through the driver's side window. Empty. I moved to the back window and saw a black duffel bag sitting on the back seat. That gave me a weird feeling, but I figured maybe it belonged to some office worker from the building upstairs who forgot to register their vehicle. Still, it bothered me. I stood there for a second just looking at the car, then I checked my phone. No messages from my supervisor. I decided to head back down to the booth and maybe call it in if the car was still there by 2. I got back to my booth around 12:45 and sat down. I kept glancing at the fourth floor camera feed. The sedan was right there in frame. At exactly 1 in the morning, I looked up at the monitor again and my stomach dropped. The car was gone. I sat up straight and rewound the camera footage. I watched the past 15 minutes in fast forward. The car just vanished. There was no footage of it driving away. No headlights, no movement, nothing. It was there 1 second and gone the next. I felt my chest tighten. This didn't make sense. Maybe the camera was lagging or had a blind spot I didn't know about. I stood up, grabbed my flashlight and radio, and headed for the elevator again. My hands were a little shaky as I pressed the button for the fourth floor. When the doors opened, I stepped out and looked toward where the sedan had been parked. My heart jumped. The car was there again, but it wasn't in the same spot. Before, it had been parked near the stairwell on the east side. Now it was on the west side near the opposite corner. I froze. I looked around the entire floor. Nobody. No sound except the hum of the elevator behind me and the distant noise of traffic from the street below. Someone had moved that car and I didn't see it happen. I felt a chill run down my arms. I pulled out my radio, ready to call for backup if I needed to. I walked toward the sedan again, this time more cautiously. The overhead lights flickered slightly. I could hear my own breathing. I got close to the car and looked inside again. The duffel bag was still in the back seat. Then I heard it, footsteps, slow and deliberate coming from above me. Fifth floor. I stopped and listened. The footsteps were moving toward the stairwell. I called out, "Hello, parking garage is closed. You need to leave." The footsteps stopped immediately. Silence. 10 seconds, 15. My pulse was racing. I called out again, "I'm security. Please identify yourself." Nothing. Then the footsteps started again, but this time they were going down the stairs. Not up, down, toward me. I backed away from the car, my eyes locked on the stairwell entrance about 30 feet away. I could feel sweat forming on the back of my neck. I gripped my radio tighter. The footsteps were getting closer. I wanted to run, but I also wanted to see who it was. Then they stopped again. I decided I needed to get back to the booth and call my supervisor or maybe even the cops. I started walking quickly toward the elevator, keeping my eyes on the stairwell. As I passed by one of the large concrete support columns, I saw her. A woman standing right next to the sedan. She was staring directly at me. She wore a dark hoodie pulled up over her head, and in her right hand she held a crowbar. We were maybe 30 or 40 feet apart. I stopped walking. My mouth went dry. I said, "Ma'am, you can't be here. This is private property." She didn't respond. She just kept staring at me. Her face was mostly hidden in shadow, but I could see her eyes. Cold, empty, no expression. Every instinct in my body screamed danger. Then she started walking toward me, slowly, deliberately. I took a step back and said louder, "Stop right there. I'm calling the police." She didn't stop. She kept coming. I turned and ran. I sprinted toward the elevator and jabbed the button over and over. I could hear her footsteps behind me, now faster, heavier. The elevator doors opened and I threw myself inside and slammed the close button. I looked out and saw her running at me, the crowbar raised. The doors closed just as she reached them. I heard a loud metallic bang as the crowbar hit the door. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold my phone. I hit the button for the first floor and the elevator started moving. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. When the operator answered, I was almost out of breath. I told her there was someone in the garage with a weapon and that I was being chased. She asked for my location and I gave her the address. She told me officers were on the way and to stay on the line. The elevator reached the first floor and I ran out toward my booth. I got inside and locked the door behind me. I crouched down behind the desk and looked at the camera monitors. I could see her on the stairwell camera. She was walking down from the fourth floor to the third, then the second. She was coming after me. The operator asked if I was safe and I whispered yes for now. She said officers were 3 to 4 minutes out. I watched the woman reach the first floor. She walked slowly across the garage toward my booth. I ducked lower. I heard her footsteps outside. Then she tried the door handle. It was locked. She stood there for a moment and then she knocked on the glass window with the crowbar. 3 slow knocks. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. She stood outside my booth for what felt like forever but was probably only 2 minutes. I kept my head down. I didn't want to look at her. Then the knocking stopped. I heard her footsteps moving away. I carefully lifted my head just enough to see the monitors. She was walking toward the exit gate. The gate started to open. I hadn't pressed the button. She didn't have a key card. It just opened on its own. She walked out into the street and disappeared into the darkness. A minute later, I heard sirens. 2 police cars pulled into the garage and 4 officers got out. I unlocked the booth door and ran out to meet them. I was shaking. I told them everything. They searched the entire garage top to bottom. When they got to the 4th floor, they found the sedan. No one inside. They opened the duffel bag, just some old clothes. They ran the plates. The car had been reported stolen 2 weeks ago. They checked the security footage with me. The woman appeared on the 5th floor camera at 11:45, but there was no footage of her entering the garage. She just appeared. And when she left, the exit gate opened for her automatically, even though the system showed no card scan. One of the officers told me this was the 3rd incident this month. A woman matching her description had broken into 2 other parking garages at night. They hadn't caught her yet. They didn't know what she was looking for or why she targeted garages. My supervisor came in early to relieve me and I went home. The police told me to take a few days off, but I couldn't afford to miss work. I came back the next week. I still work there, but I'm not the same. Every night I check the cameras constantly. I double-check the locks. I keep my phone in my hand ready to call 911 again. I wonder if she'll come back. I wonder what she wanted. And I wonder how she got in without leaving any trace. That's the part that scares me the most. She knew the garage. She knew where the cameras were. She knew how to move without being seen until she wanted to be. I don't feel safe anymore, but I can't quit. I need this job. So every night I sit in that booth and I wait and I watch. And I hope I never see her again. I work the night shift at a 24/7 convenience store just outside the city to help pay for college. It is not glamorous, but it covers my tuition and rent. My shifts run from 11 at night until 7 in the morning, and honestly, after 1 in the morning, it gets pretty dead. The store sits in an industrial area with a couple of abandoned warehouses nearby, so once the evening crowd clears out, I am usually alone for hours. Tonight was a Wednesday and I had just started my shift around 11:30. Marcus, the guy who works the evening shift, had already left and I was by myself. I checked my phone and saw a text from my girlfriend asking how work was going. I texted back quiet night so far and slipped my phone into my pocket. I looked out at the empty parking lot. Just my beat-up Toyota and a few semi-trucks parked way out by the edge of the lot. Around 12:15, the first customer of my shift walked in. He was a man in his early 40s wearing a black hoodie. He grabbed a bottle of water from the cooler and came up to the counter. He paid with cash and did not say a single word. What made me uncomfortable was the way he stared at me the entire time I made change. Not just looking, but staring. His eyes did not blink. I handed him his change and said, "Have a good night," but he just turned and walked out. I watched him get into a white van with no license plate parked in the far corner of the lot. I shook it off thinking maybe the guy was just tired from a long drive. I went back to wiping down the counter and restocking the candy aisle. About 20 minutes later, I glanced out the window and noticed the white van was still there. The engine was not running, and the lights were off, but I had this feeling someone was still inside. I told myself he was probably just resting before getting back on the road. I tried to focus on work and started checking inventory in the back. At 12:45, a young couple came in and bought some snacks and gas. They left a few minutes later, and once again the parking lot was empty except for the white van and my car. I had to take the trash out, so I grabbed the bag from behind the counter and headed toward the back door. I pushed it open and stepped outside into the dark area behind the store. There was one dim light above the door, and the dumpster was about 30 feet away. I walked over, tossed the bag in, and turned to head back inside. That is when I heard something from the direction of the old warehouse next to us. It sounded like metal hitting metal. I stopped and listened but did not hear anything else. I figured it was probably a stray cat or maybe just the wind knocking something over. Still, I picked up my pace and went back inside, making sure to lock the door behind me. When I got back to the front, I looked out the window again. The white van was still there. It had been over 45 minutes now. I started to feel genuinely worried. I pulled out my phone thinking maybe I should call the police, but then I thought they would probably tell me I was overreacting. Someone parked in a public lot was not exactly a crime. I decided to take a picture of the van just in case I needed it later. As I was lining up the shot, the lights inside the store suddenly flickered 3 times and then went completely out. Everything went dark except for the glow from the refrigerators and the ATM in the corner. I walked over to the breaker box behind the counter and checked it. The main switch was still on, but the lights would not come back. I flipped it off and on a few times. Nothing. I thought maybe there was an issue with the electrical system, but it seemed strange that it would just go out like that for no reason. I stood there in the dark using my phone flashlight when I heard a knock on the front door. I shined the light toward the glass and saw the man in the black hoodie standing outside. He was not moving, just standing there looking in. I called out through the door, "Can I help you?" He did not answer. He just kept staring. Then after a few seconds he reached out and tried the door handle. The door was locked, but he kept trying to turn it. I raised my voice and said, "We are closed due to a power outage." He stopped and looked at me for a moment. Then he turned and walked back toward the white van. I let out a breath I did not realize I was holding. But then something hit me. The power was only out inside the store. The lights outside in the parking lot were still on. So how did he know I was in here if everything was dark? I decided I needed to call my manager, Dave. He picked up on the third ring and I explained what was happening. He said he would call an electrician and be there in 20 minutes. He told me to lock myself in the back office and wait. I did exactly that. I walked into the small room behind the counter and locked the door. I sat down in the dark with only my phone for light. A minute later, I heard something from the back of the store, the area where I had taken out the trash earlier. It sounded like someone was trying to open the back door. I heard the handle turning, but the door was locked. Then came knocking, louder this time, over and over. I sat frozen in the office chair. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. When the dispatcher answered, I told her someone was trying to break into the store. She said officers were on their way and to stay on the line. The knocking stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. About 5 minutes later, I heard something from the front of the store. It sounded like glass breaking. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I saw a baseball bat in the corner of the office that we kept for situations like this. I grabbed it and stood behind the door. I could hear footsteps inside the store now. Someone had gotten in. The footsteps were coming closer to the office. I gripped the bat with both hands. The door handle started to turn. I shouted, "Police are coming, get out." The handle stopped moving. Then I heard the footsteps running back toward the front. A few seconds later, I heard an engine start and tires screeching out of the parking lot. I stayed where I was, shaking, barely able to breathe. 2 minutes later, I heard sirens. The police checked the entire store. The front glass door had been smashed and there was a brick lying on the floor inside. The white van was gone. The officers took my statement and checked the security cameras, but the cameras had gone out when the power did. An electrician showed up about 30 minutes later and inspected the system. He found that someone had deliberately cut the main breaker from outside the building. That is when it really sank in. This was not random. It was planned. My manager, Dave, arrived shortly after and told me to go home and get some rest. He said the company would hire security for the night shifts from now on. On the drive home, I kept checking my rearview mirror. When I finally got to my apartment, I locked every door and window. I did not sleep at all that night. The next morning, the police called. They had found the white van abandoned in an empty lot about 10 miles away. No plates, no fingerprints, nothing. They had no idea who the man was or what he wanted. I do not know what would have happened if I had not locked that office door or if the police had taken any longer to arrive. All I know is I requested a transfer to the day shift the next week. I still work at that store, but I will never work another night shift alone again.